Welcome to Rooted to Thrive, conversations to elevate our humanity. I'm your host, Rochelle Peterson-Ansari, Professor P for short. This is your podcast sanctuary for cultivating mindsets and skills to elevate our shared humanity. We're taking a deep dive into practical strategies to evolve as anti-racist, culturally competent, and inclusive individuals and leaders. In each episode, we're bringing you real-world examples and actionable takeaways. We're going to talk about personal growth, fostering connection, and creating positive change that dismantles systemic barriers and creates environments where all of us are valued, empowered, and activate our collective power. This is Rooted to Thrive. And welcome back to everyone joining us on the Rooted to Thrive Conversations that Elevate Our Humanity podcast. I'm your host, Professor P, Rochelle Peterson-Ansari, and today we have Dr. Chezare A, who is Associate Professor of Equity and Inclusion in Education Policy at Vanderbilt University. He's a teacher, educator, researcher, author of countless articles, 3 books, and the newest one is Centering Possibility in Black Education. He's a TEDx speaker and convener of the Possibilities Project. And that's an arts-informed knowledge hub just committed to improving Black students' well-being in education and beyond that. But more importantly, Chezare is a friend. We don't get to talk often, but we met years ago. So he just reminded me, it was over 10 years ago. I lock people in time, so it could be like yesterday, but it was years ago that we met when he lived in Philadelphia. And we connected around our mutual missions for justice and education for marginalized groups. I love how he loves our children, how he stands in the gap for them while maintaining an internal compass that points to possibilities versus problems. Chezare, I'm so honored to have this conversation with you. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm doing really well. I'm happy to be here.
That's awesome. I am so excited for this topic today, centering possibility, wellness for the Black community. So to get started, can you just share a little bit about your background and how you got involved in this work?
Yeah, so thank you again for having me, and it's great to see you and be in conversation with you, albeit virtually. Um, I got started in this work. The thing that's occurring to me is that I knew very, very early on I wanted to be a teacher. So I'm talking uh early elementary school, fourth,
Oh,
fifth grade, knowing I wanted to be a teacher. I think the thing that I've always liked about teaching was that, and to be clear, I'm a professor. You sort of ran down some of my accolades, but I am not a person who's ever really liked school. I've
mhm.
always, no one will believe that considering how much education I have, and most recently having earned an MBA. But I love learning, and I'm
Mhm.
deeply committed to expanding my worldview and how I understand the world. And the project of knowledge production, knowledge exchange has always been something that has anchored me and guided me in whatever my professional or personal pursuits have been. And so I think about being a young person wanting to become a teacher because in my mind, what better job is there but to be standing in front of young people and be engaged in that work of every day of inspiring their curiosity and
Mhm.
um, inviting them to see their own possibility, though I didn't have that language at the time, but that was always a mission as a practitioner. And then, honestly, without making this a really long story, stumbled into a PhD program, thought I wanted to be a principal, got a master's in school leadership, quickly realized in those internships that that was not the type of hard work I wanted to do. I was interested in the people work and the culture, not the bureaucracy and the politics of being a leader in a large public school system like Chicago. And so into a PhD program and truly fell in love with research and thinking about problems that are vexing to real people in real time, and really invested myself in understanding at that time empathy. A lot of my work has been on teacher empathy, and in particular, the significance of empathy to improve the quality of teacher-student interactions with Black boys, such that those interactions more often than not are producing evidence of culturally responsive pedagogy. I really threw myself into that literature and into that work and started my academic career on that journey. And then just over time, as the world has changed, we got a Black president and then we didn't. And then we moved into another space. And now it feels like we back where we were 5 years ago. Perhaps even worse because we know more about this person than we did when they entered office in 2016. But as the world changes and as the political climate changes, as a scholar, your work has to, I think, respond in a meaningful way. Um, and what I realized is that for as much as I'm writing about empathy and care about Black kids, I really needed to anchor myself to an intellectual pursuit that would also really feed me. So what that really looked like was that I didn't want to write about white supremacy anymore in the same way. I needed to figure out how to talk about and reflect on amplify the brilliance, the genius of Black people and Black children. And I read a book. I had a leave. I was on fellowship in New York and read this book called Freedom Dreams by Robin D.G. Kelley, which is in many ways Robin D.G. Kelley is in my Mount Rushmore of academics, thinkers, intellectuals. And that book really inspired me. And it's a intellectual history of the Black radical imagination, or the intellectual history of activists and orators and artists in the Black radical tradition. And he queried what was in their minds as they pursued the justice campaigns that we know them for today. And he sort of talk through this dichotomy of what we're fighting against versus what we're fighting for. And I was
Mm,
so inspired by that. And that is the sort of nucleus or foundation for my thinking around possibility.
mm.
So I hope that wasn't too long, but that's kind of
No.
a lineage, if you will, for how I got here.
Yes, I love it. So the first thing I heard was I love learning versus schooling.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and I want you to dig more into that as we talk, what that distinction is for you. But
Hmm.
we want our listeners on this episode, on this podcast, to grow and strengthen our anti-racism muscles, our cultural competence, our inclusive practices. Can you share what centering possibility, wellness for the Black community, how that topic will help our listeners in any or all of those areas?
Yeah. So, in a nutshell, we get to choose the perspectives and beliefs that we hold about a particular thing. That doesn't mean that we're not inundated by lots of other perspectives and messages about the world. And the work for us is to notice what those perspectives are and then to make some decisions about what we're going to hold on to and what we need to refuse or release. And I think centering possibility for me really comes down to what do we choose to see when we pursue the justice work that we aim to engage with. Do we see problems first or do we see possibility first? And part of what inspires that is a couple things. One, the discourse in the field of education, particularly Black education, folks who study Black life and education, the discourse around the time that 45 was elected, the discourse was very loud around schools as sites of Black pain and suffering. This
Mhm.
is an important conversation to have, in part because part of our work as academics, a huge part of our work is to clarify, to elucidate, to translate the um, not so easily recognized dimensions of teaching and learning. And so as folks are starting to do that, that discourse is so loud that for practitioners, and I remember what it meant to be a middle school teacher on the south side of Chicago who every day went to work just trying to figure it out. That discourse does too little for them in helping them resolve how they're going to show up for their kids the next day.
Mm,
And I found that tension to I found that tension to inspire me to say, okay, what is the utility for that discourse? Because it's important that we recognize problems for what they are, but then it's important to figure out how to peer beyond those problems. And the thing is, we have examples. And I go back to Kelly because he's writing about people who they're looking their terror in the face, quite literally,
mm,
and then deciding what their work needs to be because they believe in something about Black people that is driving them to be creative in their work moving forward. Abolition is creative praxis, right?
mhm,
Anti-racism is creative practice. It's creative because we have to take perhaps disparate conversations, tools that are used in disparate spaces, and then we have to put those things in conversation to create something that didn't exist before we created it. And I just think Blackness is the perfect sort of moniker or way of thinking about infinite possibility. And I write about this in the book. We sleep at night, and when we're sleeping, it's dark, right? Like we dream in the dark. We look up in the sky and at night and it's just stars. We don't know what's going on up there, but we know that it's great and it's important. And if we just had 24 hours of light, we there's a lot that we wouldn't get done. So there's a need for Blackness. And I think that need for Blackness and its representation can help us to reframe how we understand the construct of Blackness
mm.
away from death and funerals and disposability and deviance and criminality. We get those conversations and those reflections all the time. But possibility is about reframing our philosophies around Blackness and then being able to make the association between Blackness and possibility and allowing that to anchor and to do what Kelly describes as freedom dreaming, which is to establish this coherent vision of freedom, one that is connected to possibility for who and what we can become, not just where we are or where we've been, right?
All
And
right.
I think that's been important.
Yes. Okay. So let's get into it. Let's talk about how we reframe it. How do we reframe Blackness for possibility?
I mean, I think you ask that question, I'm immediately the first thing that comes to mind is like 12-step programs or AA,
Okay.
like the first step is to acknowledge that there's a problem.
Okay.
So this is in no way, there are people, who will argue education research or folks in education are always trying to rush to a solution and we don't take the time to really discern the problem. And on the one hand, I agree with that. On the other hand, I'm like, well, yeah, because the work is urgent. It is
Mm,
urgent.
hmm.
And so there's a tension that we live in as scholars and as practitioners where we do need time to understand the problem. But I think that's a step one. We need to first say, well, what is the exact problem and how do we see this problem playing itself out in, and let's not just say the world, but in the spheres of influence that we occupy, but with the data that we're responsible for, with the young people that we're interacting with, what does pain and suffering look like in real time for
Mm,
them? Let's really discern what that is. And then honestly, we got to make a different decision. And and I know it sounds simple, um, but I think it kind of comes back to, in some ways, the glass half empty, glass half full. And I think this is the other part. I started these remarks by talking about AA. There's a decision one has to make to say, oh, I actually need some help. That actually means that this work has to, for you, become so personal because sometimes we can disconnect or isolate our political, our professional, and our personal lives. Like those things are compartmentalized. They don't really interact or intersect.
mhm.
But I don't know how we do this work without them intersecting in a meaningful way. So for some of us, being able to make that leap to say the world is effed up and there's something great I can do, there's something great to be done in the world. Sometimes that takes a lot of self-talk, being in community with folks who can inspire you and motivate you to see differently. It's accessing and being exposed to models that are contradictory to the spaces or models that you've been exposed to. And
Mhm.
again, a lot of that work is about an intention that you have to move in a direction that may feel completely awkward. The last thing that I'll sort of say about this is I remember very early on in my academic career, most of graduate school, I thought I was going to quit the program because I just thought, well, what do I have to say that hasn't
Mhm.
already been said that people will respect? And part of what I came to is I really had to get settled with Chezare has a journey that is 100% his own. There's nobody who has the exact same set of interactions, experiences, that training that I've had. That unique combination of things make my voice and my perspective unique. And
Mhm.
so my work is not questioning what I have and the gift I have and the way I see the world. My work is learning enough about the tools and the world around me that I can figure out how and where to make best use of that gift.
Yes,
And
yes,
that's the work, and because it's easy to look to the left or to the right and then be like dismayed and disoriented because you're admiring other people's gifts. But when you take the moment to be like, no, okay, this is who I am, this is how I think, this is how I organize, get settled in that, and then take the risk and put it out there, you can be amazed by the sort of inspiration now that you're providing, right? And I
yes,
think that that's a huge way that we start to get there.
yes. Okay. So I hear set an intention to move differently,
Hmm.
acknowledge the problem, right? Where do I need help? Or just acknowledge that you need help.
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
then start moving. And acknowledge the problem, like what does pain and suffering look like in the spaces that you occupy, and get exposure to models for where you want to go,
Hmm.
right? On that journey. That's exceptional. Yes. And I heard you also say when you look at self, really understand that you have something to offer. Like this,
Hmm.
you have something to offer. It's not that you are, for the lack of a better word, broken.
Hmm.
Okay. Like you have something, you come to the table with something. But if we're going to look at a problem that you basically participate in knowingly or unknowingly, we have to take some of the scales off of our eyes. Yes.
For sure.
And just acknowledge, set the intention to get that help. So when I think about pain and suffering in Black communities, and particularly around education, what's that pain and suffering that teachers are witnessing, participating in,
Yeah.
that we can begin to reframe or help them use a reframing Blackness to help them alleviate?
Yeah. I think the thing that comes to mind when I think about, I start my response by talking about what the literature sort of foregrounds quite a bit. There's been so much research on school discipline and
Mhm.
all of the disproportionality. And part of what that comes down to is how we read behavior
Yes.
and how we interpret that behavior and what that behavior means for who this child is
Mhm.
or what they're set up to become. Um, and then we're judging and evaluating, and then we're making professional, decisions
Decisions. Yes.
that have untold impacts on the journeys that their lives will take from being, babies pre-K all the way through. And part of what I've learned in my research is And most of my work has been with Black boys and Black children, middle and high school. But I've heard the story over and over again about the ways that they know that they're navigating judgments and perceptions that
Mhm.
have followed them from early elementary. And so then they get into middle school and they're acting however they feel like they need to act, in part because they're trying to survive what they feel to be a fundamentally assaultive schooling environment. But they're using frameworks based on interactions with adults 5 and 6 years before that, the time that they're in, and we're reading that in today's world like these kids are terrible, but also they've created these frameworks based on being mishandled by adults many years
Mhm.
earlier, in part because we don't know what we don't know, and there are logics around Black life that we have all internalized just over time, and we are judging and projecting onto these babies before they even have an opportunity to develop a personality and really grow
Mhm.
into who they're becoming. And, there's this myth that we all heard, most of us, I don't want to generalize, but it's safe to say a lot of us grew up hearing sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never hurt. I think that's probably one of the biggest fairy tales ever.
Yes.
Words
Yes.
hurt. And beyond them hurting, they shape how we see ourselves, and then how we see the world, how we see ourselves in the world. And then we're making judgments about how we should show up based on a set of conditions that are completely outside of ourselves. There's a different person I'm going to become when I'm told every single day, I'm beautiful, you are intelligent, you can be a young person walks around with their chest out differently when that's what they've been told their whole lives. And educators can't control what happens at home, and so this the work between home and school, the continuity. What we know about Black education pre-Brown is that you got Black kids in segregated schools, but Black teachers always saw as a part of their work this urgent mantle to espouse Black cultural pride and to let young people know, I know what the world is saying, but I want you to be clear about who you are. And
Yes.
that's a different sort of uh what's the word I'm looking for? Uh calling, if you will,
Yeah.
or there's a different urgency that moves us.
Yeah. Would you also say it's a cultural orientation to move the community, right? It's centering justice for the community,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's centering, yeah, pride in oneself in a world that was saying that they were worth less.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm only saying it was because we were segregated officially at the time, but it
Yeah.
still exists in current day.
Well, and
It's,
progress is intoxicating, and we
mm,
think that we've gotten so much further than we did. And I think I
mhm,
remember we had 8 years of a Barack Obama, and you had all of this discourse around, we post-racial, we beyond racism, racism doesn't exist. I mean, y'all got a Black president. I mean, how much further can we come in this country? And then we got a Donald Trump.
mhm.
And all of these people, I'm like, let's wake up here.
Right.
Like, as much intellectually as I know about race and racism, for the country to elect this person also was a very quick reminder. Bettina Love and Carol Anderson writes about, like white backlash, and Peniel Joseph, these folks who are documenting all the ways that for every epoch of Black progress, there's always a white backlash. We have to constantly be reminded that we're not as far as we think we are. We have to be vigilant to what the mission is, which means remembering who we are and what we've had to come through as um, both evidence that whatever hard time we're in, we can overcome, but also that these people did not give anything. We had to take what we've gotten in many ways. And so they're also looking for ways to take it back. So we got to continue to
Mm.
hold the line and not allow progress to intoxicate us and massage us out of a reminder not subordinate status, but that the world that we live in was not designed for our well-being. So that well-being has to be an active part of our work. I need to eat right because if I don't, it's
Mhm.
just too easy to eat bad. Like,
Mhm.
so wellness and well-being is for us, I think is very much so an active, it's not passive, right?
Right. We must be proactive about our
Mm-hmm.
wellness. Yes. And I don't want to skip over some of what I heard already. So prior to your discussion about the political, you know, progress that we've experienced and regression that we've experienced, you were talking about words shaping who we are. And I want to get a little granular about this because when you were talking about that, two things came to mind. What was happening in schooling? This also was related to what you were sharing around discipline. Um, and what's happening at home. And I kept thinking, yes, it's generational. We're bringing what happened to the parents and grandparents and great grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles of the young people into their lives, one, right? So if we were subtracting from them, teaching them that they were not worthy, we're shaping people who are going to grow up to be adults who think they're not worthy, and they say the same things to their children,
Mm-hmm.
or they communicate it. I mean, I can see contradictory messages there. Some people say that you're all of those things, but in their behavior toward you, you see something different. And
Mm-hmm.
I would say that happens at home, that in the community, and at schools. And so I wanted to get granular about it. Like, what does it look like when, like, what does the problem look like in terms of, somebody's words in a schooling context, in a community context, or a family context? What does that look like? And then what's the antidote to that? Like, give me an example of a real middle school teacher or a real, family member, your own experience, whatever you have to share with the listeners so they can see what that looks like practically,
What it looks like
like in
for us.
practice. So you were talking about discipline, right?
Mm,
And that the disciplinary practices come from a place, right, that there's someone or multiple someone's interpretations of
mm,
the behavior
mm-hmm.
of the person, of their motivations, and that we know that it has negative or it has negative or positive consequences depending on who you're looking at.
Yeah.
Practically, like, what might someone say, or what are those like concrete messages,
Yeah.
concrete words people are hearing, or things being done around them that suggest that their behavior is negative or should be punished?
Um, as you were talking, I was reminded of a time when I taught middle school math, and
Okay.
I had a group of students. I can't remember why they needed to be in my class, but they were supposed to come back to my class for something, and they did not come. And then I went to the lunchroom, and they were just in there having a good time. And so I just looked at them and I said very calmly, uh, y'all need to beat me back to the class. If I get back before you, this is gonna be worse. So they
Mm-hmm.
go booking it out of the lunchroom and they run down the long hallway. I'm walking, I'm calm. I just walk back to the class and I close the door with somebody in there and I said, you need to leave. And I learned this very early on. You could say to kids when they act up,
Mm-hmm.
y'all are terrible. I don't know why y'all talking so much. Like uh yeah, like you can lead with the behavior, but leading with the behavior as in this sort of wrapping their identity up in that behavior versus leading with what it is that you see. Like, I'm looking at the most brilliant people in the room. I don't know people more brilliant than the people so I just don't understand how such brilliant people could do that, because that was that was beneath you to do that.
Mm,
And
mm,
I value the time I have with you, because I show up every day. I'm sharp. I put on my shirt and my tie. There's a lot of intention about how I'm showing up, because I care so much about being with y'all. But that moment had me questioning my decisions, and I don't like that feeling, because I love being here with y'all.
mm,
That's it. Literally, one of the kids said, "Well, what did she say? It was something like, well, Mr. Warren, you need to yell at them, because that's the only way they listen. You need to scream at
mm,
them." And then this is eighth grade, so they've been conditioned that, okay, I'm a kid, I'm gonna do whatever I'm gonna do, but they're gonna yell at me, and then I'm gonna do what they telling me, or I'm not. But you're it's a form of dehumanization that I have
mm.
to howl at you as an adult. You're not
Yes.
animals, you're not pets. I don't have to scream. You're intelligent beings. And I think that
Yes.
that's one of those things too, learning that students are just younger humans. Students sometimes as a label can be dehumanizing, because it's like you separate that they have passion and desire and a vision and a way of understanding themselves in the world. You rob them of that. They just your student, and I'm the
Mm,
teacher, and there's a power dynamic that's been established since the beginning of time, and I have a role that I'm operating in. That's a completely different orientation than saying, and when I taught at Michigan State, I taught the classroom management course. And
okay.
the students all wanted to know, well, how can we control the kids? And it ain't about
Control.
controlling the kids.
Mm,
It's about how do you know yourself well enough, and then create the mechanisms to know them well enough that then you can interact in such a way that they feel compelled to show up as their best selves.
yes.
That's the work, meaningful human interaction, right?
Yes, I love it. And it sounds like you also have to move from a full cup yourself,
Mm-hmm.
s- right? Like, so you had to have that sense that you are a brilliant human being,
100%.
right? With desires and vision as well. And I want to be clear, I'm not hearing you say this is a talk for white folks. This is a talk for
Oh no,
yeah,
let's talk for everybody.
everyone.
I think that
Yes.
there are some added layers we need to have with the white folks,
Okay.
but certainly, there's no
Mm.
course in most people's teacher preparation where they get in therapy and they
That,
talking through their childhood traumas, and they wrestling with their insecurities, and
thank
they're
you.
allowing themselves to lean into those insecurities so that they can fix and heal them
Hmm.
prior to getting in front of some other people, where they then explode. And as my pastor used to say, just bleed all over people, like
Yes.
hurt people. That's a real thing.
Yes, it
um
is. Yes, it is. Or, I mean, just in general, people think about it. You are having trouble at home, right? There's tension in your home, and you don't feel good about yourself, and you still have to go to work. You are in front of people who are
mm-hmm.
looking to you to help them thrive. Yet you're trying to hold it together all day.
100%.
Yes. I've seen many a teacher um, show up that way when and they had this sense of control, very quiet classrooms in some cases, right? Like eerily quiet.
Mm-hmm.
I've often felt disturbed actually when I go into schools and it's so quiet in a particular classroom while students are learning. And maybe that's because of my own orientation, but it feels like someone's just trying to control you, and
Mm-hmm.
that there's only a sense that you're learning if you're quiet, when in fact we don't know if you're learning when you're quiet,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so control being a central classroom management strategy is a powerful strategy that we need to change. So this is interesting. When you taught, because I didn't know that, right? Like, so when you taught classroom management, I'm just thinking, think of all of the domains, for learning and teaching in the profession as people are growing. What's something that you would suggest to your students to do differently right? In thinking about classroom management than what we typically hear.
Yeah. Um, well, first thing I have to say, shout out to MSU College of Education, Department of
Okay.
Teacher Education. Uh, when I got a PhD, I didn't want to be a teacher educator. I was trained in the social foundations, but I got a job in teacher education, and my work was very much relevant.
Mhm,
But it was a whole new thing to be like, okay, now I'm teaching teachers. I'm like, I
mhm,
can't make you little me's.
mhm.
I have to embrace you for where you are and who you want to be.
That's
But the first thing I had to do was throw that classroom management textbook right on out the window because that's not it. Um, and this is a year-long course, and
mm,
that first semester of the course, we would read a book called Make Me.
make me.
And it's a book written by Eric Tashalis, who is a Harvard-trained developmental, I think a developmental psychologist,
Mhm,
or he's youth development, youth and adolescent development scholar. And the whole book was just about resistance. And what I
mhm.
loved about the book was we basically they were in the field, they were interning or student teaching. And so we would come and talk through their problems of practice, but we would sit and this is, I think, a piece that gets so lost in the public discourse around teaching. You know, we know
Mhm.
our the teaching profession is devalued, and we don't see teachers as intellectuals. But that was the first. You all are intellectuals, and I wanted to become a teacher because I thought the smartest people had to be teachers. You can't be a dumb person and be a teacher. So I'm like,
Correct.
of course, I want to be a teacher because this is where smart people go. They
Mhm,
become teachers.
mhm.
And so I treated them as intellectuals, and part of what that was we're gonna take a chapter a week and we are gonna explore this concept of resistance. And at the beginning, they all had a pretty negative understanding of resistance. Resistance typically meant like refusal and not getting your way, or like
Yeah.
something violent. We
Mhm,
associate resistance to social violent social movements. Um, but by the end, they're like, oh, resistance is actually a perspective and a tool for me to recognize myself and to recognize my kids and to evaluate the substance of my interactions. Because even as I'm saying to them, you can't have three rules, one that you created that you did not co-construct with the kids,
mhm.
expect them to follow it just because you the adult and they don't know you, and these tended to be predominantly white folks who were going to work in black and brown spaces. I taught the urban education section of this course. And I said, they have perspectives of white people that you will never know because they live in families and communities that have circulated stories and experiences. And you better believe that they're projecting all of that onto you, not because
Yes.
they hate you, but because they don't know, they can't developmentally detach the schema that they have around whiteness and white people from your white body standing in front of them. It doesn't matter how nice you are, how nice you talk to them. You just need to know that when they resist you, it is saying something about the environment that you're responsible for stewarding, not building necessarily,
Mhm.
stewarding, because it needs to be co-constructed.
Right.
And when they resist, then now you're gonna have a set of perspectives to evaluate the origin of that resistance. And that
Yes.
becomes a boon to your work because you can become nimble and you can navigate because you got this knowledge. That's the work that we're doing in a classroom
Yes.
management course, not
Yes.
just teaching you the best practice. Um, that was probably frameworks that were developed not with black kids in mind.
In mind, right. Well, but it is a best practice to understand resistance. But
I don't
yes.
know very many people, and when I was an instructional coach, um, and we would interview candidates, we asked them, "Can you control the classroom?" Flat out. We didn't ask them how well they understood student development, or
Mhm,
like
mhm,
when young people resist. Well, none of that was language we use.
mhm.
Can you control the principal that I work for? This black woman, Dr. Bar, I love her. She said, "Oh, you smart. You went to the state flagship. Can you teach?
Right.
Tell me more." Like that was, all of this other stuff. I need to know that those kids are not going to burn this building down. And that as an
Okay.
adult, and that was the standard. And I think throughout my career, definitely by the time I started teaching, I'm like, oh no, this is much more complicated. Um,
Yes.
but it doesn't have to be. There's work we can do as teacher educators to decomplicate this,
I love
and
it.
equip people.
Yes, I love it. And something that you said I think is pivotal, and maybe because it's really leaning into a bias I have, that you had a background in the social foundations. So
Hmm.
you have had practice thinking critically about society, about
Hmm.
culture, about how we influence our individual selves, influence culture, and culture influences us.
Hmm.
And that also has not been prioritized.
Hmm.
Right.
Yep.
So you mentioned, therapy. Yes, people could go to therapy to figure themselves out because some of us need real therapy to do that. But I also teach the cultural foundations of education in spaces where I have taught, and just having an equity centered lens is what we teach in those spaces, right? So
Hmm.
it cultural foundations evolved from like the multicultural education courses that we had in the 80s and 90s, but really at the way I taught it and the people that I taught alongside taught it was that this was a we wanted students to leave understanding their power
Hmm.
and how they themselves, so our teachers who were pre-service and in-service teachers, how they understood themselves, how
Hmm.
they understood others, also as a result of how they understood themselves.
Hmm.
Yes, and help them. Well, we also taught them how schooling worked in oppressive ways and in ways that inspire possibility and thriving, right?
Hmm.
Many people who do choose teaching enjoyed school.
Hmm.
It's a no-brainer, right? For them. They don't have any question about the way schooling worked and
Hmm.
did not understand the experiences of people who did where it did not work well for them.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
I was one of those people who the institution worked well for me. So I had to do that level of introspection as well in order to help my students do that introspection, the graduate students and undergraduate students preparing to teach, or people already teaching. I had people who were in classrooms already saying, I'm upset that I never had this before. And these were mainly graduate students, so they had their undergraduate pre-service experience. They were upset that they did not have the opportunity to reframe or didn't have support. They had opportunities, I'm sure, but they didn't have support throughout 4 years or
Mm.
more of a college education to help them see their students as brilliant and thrive.
Yeah.
And to help them understand that to no fault of their own, you are going to breathe in the smog, right? You're going to breathe in, yes, a term coined by Beverly Daniels
Danny
Tatum
Tatum. Hmm.
around the smog of racism, but we all breathe in the smog of heterosexism, the smog of sexism, and religious oppression. The list goes on.
Hmm.
uh, we all breathe in the smog to no fault of our own. When we're in schools, our brains aren't fully developed. We don't have the tools. So we do need trusted adults who understand more fully our experience
Hmm.
and their own.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yes. So now you have me thinking about your work on empathy,
Hmm.
right? How Well, what did you learn in your research, in your interactions, with other educators, with other people? What did you learn about how people needed to access that empathy to connect, to better connect to people across difference, people who they did not share identities with.
Yeah. Much of my research on empathy has been about trying to operationalize it
Mm-hmm.
in the professional teaching context, in and through deep empirical study of effective teachers' interactions with Black boys.
Okay.
I'm looking to the field, folks who are coming after me to take that work a bit further and
Okay.
further test out some of the ideas. But I think the biggest piece is that um, I've come to understand empathy as a tool for knowing, and it is a lot of us do things on, or to your earlier point, do things on autopilot, and
Mm-hmm.
we don't know when we're doing things, but
Mm-hmm.
it's something about getting language and process for things that we've always done that can then help us to develop an intention to actually exercise use of a tool that we didn't know we were already using, but now we can. I got some language and a way of talking about it. So I think at a basic level, evidence of empathy demonstrates or helps folks engage in more risk taking. It helps them be more proactive in their um, interactions with young people, particularly in trying to build systems or pathways to success that are
Mm-hmm.
aligned well with the young person's vision for themselves and who they want to be in the world. It invites them to act and to exercise use of their agency and autonomy in ways that is less likely for someone who is not exercising use of empathy. And it doesn't have to look the same way. It's not about being this softy necessary. It's definitely not about lowering expectations. It's about how well do I create opportunities to know students. And part of how we talk about that from a scientific perspective is what they call perspective taking. You know, so
Mm-hmm.
my ability to take off my point of view, put yours on, and then respond to you in the way that you would respond to yourself if you were in my position of authority and influence.
Mm-hmm.
And the difficult thing about perspective taking is that I can look at you and see what's wrong, and I can respond to you how I would want someone to respond to me, or I can respond to you based on how you want someone to respond to you. Uh, One of those is more egotistical, the other one is far less egotistical. And it's the difference between the golden rule and the platinum rule. You know, treating
Yes.
others the way you want to be treated versus treating others the way they want to be treated. There's more effort in the latter to figure out, well, how do they want to be treated? It means I'm not waiting till there's a problem. I'm actually working really hard from day one to build a knowledge base about you that is first person. So it's interaction with you, but it's also developing communities of practice with my colleagues around let's read some books about race. It's being immersed in the social spaces where young people exist as their most free and most authentic selves and becoming a bit of an ethnographer, not someone on parade. Like I'm not
Mm-hmm.
looking so that I can gawk and um, uh, sort of like judge how
Yeah.
young people are living their life. I want to get up close and personal with the versions of themselves that they may not feel as safe to present when I'm in the classroom. That all becomes knowledge that I can execute on when it's time for me to interact. When I'm either inviting you to answer a question during a lesson or I'm wanting to address a conduct that is unfavorable, you want to develop a knowledge bank. And the thing that becomes contentious for people is, well, if I teach high school, I got 130 kids. How do I develop a knowledge bank for 130 kids? You don't have to, because not every kid is going to need the level of the deep level of interaction that other kids may need. So you're
Mm-hmm.
making these decisions about how you're engaging with different kids. But at the end of the day, it's also an invitation. And what I've seen in my work is for teachers to notice kids and to notice who needs what when and to become savvy with trying things and from going back to this theme around one's own personal development,
Mm-hmm.
learning not to become offended when things don't work. teachers are perfectionists and type A. At least I was. I know
Mhm.
a lot of us who were that way.
Yes.
And you got to get out of that perfection. That perfectionism speaks to your own trauma and your own
Mm,
feeling of rejection. I mean, I'm
yeah.
not no therapist. I'm just telling you what I've been told, but it's resonated that I am a recovering perfectionist. And when I've learned to like stop trying to make everything A about me and two about my ability to be exceptional, then I've become really okay when my eyes are not always dotted. And like life goes on because I
Yes.
get to be human and I get
Mhm.
what's the saying say it's okay to not be okay. Like
Right.
so that's a teacher who persists and demonstrate evidence of empathy. They're starting to hone those skills in a meaningful way. And over time, it's not in one interaction, but it's over time, is what I always say. You will see the fruits of those interactions. And it speaks, I think, further to SEL and
Mhm.
what scholars have written about the crisis of connection. How do we build human connection? Well, it comes through positive relationships. Well, how do you build positive relationships? The building blocks is the one-on-one interaction, the everyday, the mundane, the stuff that we're not really thinking, because the kids are developing frameworks that they are then using to then navigate the academic space. And you get to
Mhm.
either intervene, reinforce or disrupt those frameworks, or
Yes,
help them to
yes.
remake them all over.
Yes, and I see right there, that's a way to center possibility for the wellness.
100%.
Yes, for the wellness for the Black community. Well, this has been a rich conversation. I love everything that you have shared. I've been taking copious notes.
Mhm.
We I love the vibe, right? Like we could talk about these things forever. The thing is, I just want people to remember that, or if you missed it in this conversation, that some things don't come to us naturally. And I wanted to
Mhm.
say that to
Mhm.
especially to people who look like me because we're breathing in smog too,
Yeah.
right? Like some of us grew up hearing, well, people are still hearing it, that they had to get out of their neighborhood, right? In order, like success looked like getting out. And so that just suggests that something's wrong with it, right?
Yeah.
Something's wrong with our communities and we have to get out of it. And as much as we would say that, and we do, love our own people, many of us have breathed in the smog of elitism. And so when our social classes have changed, many of us are perpetuating the same pain
Yeah.
and suffering. We might do a lot of surface things, right? Tell the students or, put things on their doorways that say that, they are kings and queens. But in our interactions, are we treating them like
That's right.
princes and princesses and
That's
kings and
right.
queens, etc., right? So we
Mhm.
we really, all of us, have to think about how we are centering the well-being of people. This is phenomenal. I am so glad that we have you as a resource,
Thank
to,
you.
yes, to help elevate our humanity. Do you have any final words of advice for our listeners, or a resource, any resource that you would recommend for further learning?
Well, watch my TED Talk.
Oh, yes, the TED Talk.
I think that's one thing, but uh, I love Robin D.G. Kelly's book. I recommend it pretty much anytime I get an opportunity. And just to be kind to ourselves. The
Mhm.
world is on fire, quite literally. Um, and yeah, there's so much going on all the time, and we have to find ways to just continue to get quiet and be with ourselves and just to be kind and recognize that we are all doing our very best and to extend grace. Um, yeah, so
Yes,
awesome.
yes. I want to thank you so much. Yes, and thank you for just taking this time out of your day. You didn't have to do this.
Thank you
Uh, you
for the
know,
invitation.
yes. Now please tell the listeners how they can reach you after this. Besides Okay, first of all, look up that TED Talk or the TEDx. It's a TED Ed on empathy,
Yep.
right? And how else can they find you or contact you?
Uh, uh, ChezareAWarren.com.
Okay.
My research lab, the Possibilities Project, TPPcollaborative.com. And then at TPP collab on Instagram. I think we all coming off Twitter, X, whatever that is. I need to go ahead and get myself right on off of there. But
Mhm.
also at Chezare Augustus on Instagram.
All right, that is fabulous. And I wish maybe it's for another conversation. We could talk more about the Possibilities Project. I like in honor, I wore my Basquiat. Can you see
Oh,
it? Can you see? Listen.
I am obsessed with Basquiat. I love Basquiat.
Yes, yes, me too. Well, I want to thank you once again. It was an
Thank you.
honor. And thank you to everyone who stopped by. Please subscribe, leave a comment, share this episode. And thank you again for listening
Thank
to
you.
Rooted to
Thank you.
Thrive.